Hello. Oh,
Yo,
hello.
what's up? That was the worst thing I've ever gone through. That was absolutely terrible. And I just wanted to ask you if you've ever heard the tale of the libertarians and the bears.
No, I haven't.
Which
I haven't heard that tale.
oh, absolutely fantastic.
Do
Okay,
regale us.
I will post an article on chat.
Oh,
Just so chat knows.
send it to me on Discord so I can post it because only mods and I can post links in chat.
Ooh, okay.
All right.
In that sense, I mean, we have experienced the glory of anarcho-capitalism. In fact, we did. Uh, at,
Yeah.
at at this small town in the U.S. And what happened was that there were no real regulations for people, and therefore no regulations for how you handle your trash. So the town got invaded by bears, and
Well, that's why you need
and
your assault rifles. You know, when the 40 to 50 feral bears come through town.
absolutely. I don't even remember. It was like a dozen people fucking died, and the town was
Shit.
shortly abandoned, and, and of course the government had to step in and help out with whatever whatever mess it was. And honestly, it just goes to show that anarcho-capitalism does can't even handle nature. Never mind the fucking militias of Jeff Bezos.
Well, and
And
this is one of the things that really bothers me, right? Like the conflation of the existence of markets with capitalism, because capitalism is a very distinct thing. It is not something that has existed throughout the entirety of human history in every human civilization that we've encountered. I have no. By the way, I'm willing to give my previous caller the benefit of the doubt on like some monks somewhere were the first group to start engaging in some form of capitalism. But like the idea that it didn't become widespread until like the age of mercantilism and it didn't become codified until the transatlantic slave trade is absolutely incorrect. And I say that as someone who has a background in studying history. Um, it it it's wild, guys. If you want a real quick rundown over how capitalism happened, essentially it's this: you had chaos after the fall of the Roman Empire, then you had the rise of feudalism, and that lasted for a very very long time. And essentially, in feudalism, you were definitely not coerced. You either were part of a lord's fiefdom or you were a barbarian tribe to be slaughtered at their whim. Um, you know, it's totally not coercive, you know. Um, and you could choose to be a peasant, and you became a peasant, and then you just worked until you died at the age of 35. And yeah, that was basically the life of a peasant. Except as technology progressed, tradespeople were able to exercise their trades, and essentially, by exercising their trades, they would earn more money than the average peasant. And using that money, they were able to invest in other trades, and essentially that continued until it created this middle class that was able to rival the power of these kings and queens. And that's when you started seeing revolutions against feudalism and the supplanting of feudalism with capitalism. And then you had Karl Marx come along and some other thinkers prior to him saying, gee whiz, wouldn't it be great if we just like workers at the factory just collectively owned the factory instead of having one asshole at the top who is siphoning the excess value of their labor to himself? That's essentially the the revolution of Marx in a nutshell. And that's why I advocate for socialism. It's much better than an asshole sucking up everything.
yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And one thing that ANCAPs and libertarians fail to realize is that we already have a word for societies where there is no monopoly of violence whatsoever, and also no government. or rather the government doesn't have the monopoly of violence. We call them failed states,
True.
right? It's always a country in civil war. We have never ever in the history of society found a country or community without the monopoly of violence, where there is peace, where there's peaceful and harmonic cohabitation between the various factions. It doesn't happen. And for an anecdote with my country of Brazil, we did have anarcho-capitalist societies, and we call them favelas.
Hmm.
It's in essence the when we abolished slavery, or
In Brazil.
or for, yeah, in Brazil, when we abolished slavery pretty late with us, 1888, and the slaves had really nowhere to go, nowhere where they were wanted, the former slaves. So they went through the hills and places of uneven territory, where where in essence in essence the white men would never settle there. They would expand their cities elsewhere, and to some extent they succeeded. They managed to found societies um, where they, with no support from the government or any overarching authority, created their own homes, and they created their own wells, and managed and built their own clinics, because fuck if the white people were going to build the hospitals for former slaves, they didn't. But that lasted for what, 10 years, until favelas started taking the shape that it is known today for Americans, where they are this crime-ridden shithole, right? Which is the kind of how the foreign media paints it.
Right.
And
That's the point I was trying to make with the comparison to mobsters and mobs when I was talking to that guy.
and
Because like again, if they're they don't have to come in and say, "Hey, we're gonna kill you or take your stuff," because that's
yeah,
implied. It's an implied threat because they
yeah,
have the monopoly of violence in that area. Area.
yeah. The gangs on the favelas, they started merely as people who were building hospitals and leading the communities. And to lead the communities, they needed weapons, so they gathered all the weapons, and they kept all the weapons, and they engaged in drug trafficking, which, I'm sure libertarians are all for, but that's how they built their business. From an anarcho-capitalist standpoint, that's perfectly legitimate, and so they did, and they had all the weapons, and until they stopped to think, hey, we have all the weapons, we are building all the shit for these people, we we have all the money, this is ours. Everything here is ours. And so it was. The gangs became the de facto government,
Right.
and anarcho-capitalism lasted for less than a generation, because that's what always happens with these communities. It's it's always like that. You have a community of well-intentioned folk, and power accumulates, and then it becomes a government, and that's always how it is.
Yeah.
There is no universe where you can have an anarcho-capitalist society
No, no, no.
that lets
Venom,
you.
Jesus. They'll just there will be the ethics of non-violence. You know the
Then
pact. Remember the
yeah,
pact.
the NAP, right?
Yeah,
And I mean,
non-aggression
surprise
principle.
surprisingly, people don't respect that in the real world. Who would have thought that
Weird.
without any without any enforcing power, no one would respect it? And it's just frustrating to me. And also, I wonder, like, because the very ethics of it is kind of weird for me. Like, how do you handle disabled people?
Right. Well, I mean, fuck
How?
them. I mean, that's essentially the ANCAP ideology, right? Fuck you if you need help from me in any regard. You better be able to pay for it, or fuck you.
But honestly, just pivoting from a little bit from that, because I could spend hours talking shitting on NCAPs, and I really, I don't want to overtake this room. I just wanted to make some question about market socialism, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
um like basically what's the plan, right?
Hmm.
Because we have these ideas of worker co-ops and expansion. So if someone were to ask you why why does it seem so hard for worker co-ops to horizontally expand without depending on private firm contracts
Hmm.
or becoming like these semi worker co-op kind of corporations like the I forgot the name. What's the biggest one? The
Mondragon.
Yeah, like the Mondragon. Like
Yeah.
why does that happen and how to stop it basically?
I mean, so when it comes to like what I would advocate for, like tangibly in the world, what I advocate for is are systems that would foster the creation of worker co-ops. Because right now, most worker co-ops tend to emerge in industries where there is built-in capital for individual workers to basically be able to band together, and that's not something that happens in, say, a service economy very often. You can't get like the workers together, like a bunch of workers at from Walmart, for example, to band together to create a worker co-op. Like they just don't have the capital, right? Like most people in the United States, anyway, don't. I don't know how it is in Brazil, but we don't have like $400 to be able to handle unexpected expenses, let alone invest in a company. Um,
Right.
so one of the things that I advocate for, sorry, I didn't finish my point. Um, this is why a lot of worker co-ops emerge from agricultural industries, like farmers. Farmers tend to have the capital that they need to run their own farm, and then they tend to be able to get an advantage from collectively working together, collectively owning the capital and their business. Um, and so basically, what I would say that we should do is we should have a federal program that specifically exists to give loans to small worker co ops. I think that this is a good investment for a lot of reasons, largely because worker co ops, when they get big, they tend not to vote to move overseas because the workers generally don't want to move overseas. Um, when worker co-ops get into action, when they get started up, they tend to be more efficient. They're between 9 to 14% more efficient than private businesses, and on top of that, I there is a certain resilience to harsh economic conditions. So if the economy takes a downturn, worker co-ops are more likely to survive, and worker co-ops are more likely to preserve jobs, which helps the wider economy. Um, and so there's a lot of benefits here for the government specifically to invest in worker co-ops. You get more tax revenue, after all, if a company is more efficient and if it stays in the United States. It stays in its home country. Um, I think that there's a really good argument to be made here for worker co-ops, especially because the government already subsidizes loans to private businesses. We should just have these systems for worker co-ops, and currently we don't. Um,
Right. And
so,
so
well, uh,
okay,
oh, sorry.
sorry.
There's one more thing. I also think that when the government has to step in to bail out an industry or a company, especially a big one, they should be required to become worker co-ops. Because again, for all of the reasons that I mentioned, it benefits our like local economies far more if they're worker co-ops. It benefits the government more, so it makes it a better investment rather than just giving them money and and bailing them out of their financial trouble. Um,
I I see. And you believe that this could all be done within the confines of liberal democracy in the U.S. right now?
yeah, I like so one of the things that I think is that there might be some people who care very deeply about preserving capitalism, but I believe that there are a lot of local initiatives to foster worker co-ops because of all the benefits that I just mentioned. Um, and on top of that, they're just fiscally more responsible. It like they have a higher survival rate, like a higher success rate than private businesses as well. So like all of these things I think are very good arguments, and I think that by taking these small steps, we can basically set into motion a like the saying like you can start an avalanche with a couple pebbles, or something like that.
Right.
I think that this could be something very similar, because again, they're more efficient. If we have programs that foster them, if we have programs that transition large companies, you know, gradually over a period of time, that means that worker co-ops will then be put front and center. It means that they will be competing directly with these large private businesses. And I think that that is a good thing because I think worker co-ops will come out the other side looking better than private businesses. Um, and so I think
Um,
in a long term, it does win.
I see. And so one argument I've seen, and I'm not saying that I subscribe to it, but it's an argument I see often in regards to worker co-ops,
Hmm.
is that they don't expand. And you've mentioned this in regards to overseas, but I'm talking really domestically.
Hmm.
They don't tend to expand as promptly as private enterprise. Like let's say that that we hit an even bigger crisis, right?
Hmm.
And Amazon needs a bailout, and through some miracle, it a Congress, the Senate, and the Supreme Court approved the idea
Yep.
that now Amazon is a worker co-op. Do you think that Amazon will still be creating more and more branches out of itself while a worker co-op, taking into account that every time you expand the share gets redistributed more and more towards more workers? Like, what would be the mechanisms through which a large corporation could still expand and still provide more jobs for more people? Like, how do we handle something like that?
Yeah, so there are a number of models that we could use. Like, for example, I know Mondragon has a lot of problems, but I think it might be a model for at least a somewhat of a path forward. In the case of Mondragon, for people who don't know, they essentially have a two-tiered stock system where all employees get tier 1 stock. It's limited just to employees, and they're able to make decisions about the business collectively. And then investors in the general stock market get tier 2 stock. But no matter what happens, the employees with the tier 1 stock have more say over the running of the business than the people with the tier 2 stock. My main issue with Mondragon is that the way they distribute tier 1 stock ignores a lot of people, and I would be in favor of not doing that. you know. Um,
Wait, how does tier one and tier two work? Could you explain to me again? I really
yeah.
didn't quite get it.
Essentially it just allows the employees, because like in a typical private business right now, essentially you'll have just one stock, you'll have general stock, right?
Right.
And the shareholders collectively own the company and collectively get the rewards from the company, right? And the shareholders are able to dictate the direction that the company is going to take, stuff like that. In a two-tiered stock system, the people with the tier 1 stock have more of a say in the direction of the company and how it's run, its policies, etc. Um, where and the tier 2 stockholders still have like a voice, but it is a much smaller, and it will never be as like influential as anyone with tier 1 stock.
I see.
But
And
so that's one possibility. I think that there are other possibilities. For example, it having multiple worker co-op structures within one larger worker co-op, um, like having a worker co-op on the ground that handles like warehouse stuff, having a worker co-op that handles like the cybersecurity stuff, having a worker co-op that handles all of this, but they all work together in like a centralized hub. Um,
okay, they all work together, and there is like no extract, because you say that it's like a superstructure of worker co-ops, yeah.
mhm.
So let's say the larger the main branch ends up expanding into this separate worker co-op. So there is no wealth extraction coming from the main branch.
Right.
So how do they justify the investment into these separate branches if they are not going to extract the wealth of these other businesses?
Well,
Are they just
you could justify it by saying like we're going to like through these other businesses we will be able to earn more money which we can use to improve your wages or cut the amount of time that you work while still maintaining the same wage. Or for example, like one of the examples that I always come back to is like automation. There's no reason to fear automation in a worker co-op because the automation benefits everybody who's a member of the worker co-op. So, like, they could automate their factory or their warehouses, and that would benefit everyone in the wider company. And you can make similar arguments for expansion in that it might not be like as you get bigger and bigger, it might not be like yeah we hire one person and you get like $15 more per year, but you could say especially with a larger company we're going to open a new branch, we're going to hire 15,000 new people, and that's going to improve your wages by like you know several $1,000s a year, stuff like that. I'm talking in hypotheticals here, but
I
um,
see.
yeah.
Okay, and another question that I have is in regards to market failure, right?
Hmm.
What happens when if a worker co-op, unlike today, where in theory your company fails, you can find another job.
Hmm.
With the worker co-ops, usually your investments are in the company that you work at. So
Right.
how do we handle failure? Because lots of companies do fail. How
Hmm.
how do you handle when a worker co-ops go under? How do we help these people under the current system? Because they will be a lot more invested naturally into the company that they work at. So how do
Right.
we do how do
So
we handle it?
I think this is a case where like part of this is that we don't know all of the pitfalls that could happen with worker co-ops, which is part of why I advocate for a slow transition rather than like Thanos snapping like all private companies into worker co-ops. Um,
Okay.
and so by having it be a slow transition, we can find out what the like how like the better ways to structure larger companies. We can find out the better ways of um, helping worker co-ops develop and foster. We can get a lot of that stuff done right now because like it's one of the things like I've gone through trying to set up my own worker co-op. And one of the problems is there's not a ton of people out there. Like, there aren't a ton of lawyers that specialize in how to set up a worker co op. There aren't a ton of, like, business strategies about how to effectively run a worker co op. They're out there, but, like, especially if you're going into a new industry that's, like, not agriculture, right? Like, it can be some uncharted territory. So, um, right now, like, yeah, I agree that there needs to be probably an overhaul of like law when as it regards to worker co-ops. I'm what that might be. I'm not an expert in those things. But I
I
I
see.
I know that's a problem that we need to address. And also I know that essentially there is a problem when it comes to oh gosh, I just I mind blanked.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. But like it's one of those things where there are unforeseen problems. And currently, I mean, what would happen is what would happen with any other business if it fails, right? You would have to go into bankruptcy to deal with the debts of the company, et cetera, et cetera. It wouldn't be any different, like as of this moment, from like a traditional private company going bankrupt. Um, but I do think that um, there are ways that we can, like, one of the problems is that there isn't specific law as regards to collectively owned companies. So one of the problems right now is that there is if you wanted to start like an LLC and turn it into a worker co-op, one of the workers, like one worker, would have to take on all of the liability, and that's a hard sell, when you're trying to form a worker co-op. Um, And so that's what I mean by like we would need to change some of the laws to better accommodate these things. Um, and yeah, I'm still blanking on that last point, but I hope I made my point well.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. Um, sure. Yeah, I agree on lots of those points, but also I see some criticism coming from the left
Hmm.
as regards to the practicality of implementing such a structural change when the U.S., for instance, has a constitution that very strongly protects private property. When we have and when we have a Congress that that verifiably doesn't really follow um, the will of the people. So let's say these ideas spread, right, and people are getting into the idea of workplace democracy,
Hmm.
and yet it happens like it did on Colombia, I think, where Congress completely rejects the idea, contradicting, if you go by the Colombia example, 90% of the population. Like, then what? How do we deal with these institutions that refuse to acknowledge the will of the people? Is it are we just supposed to keep on voting and hoping for for the subsequent 4 years, and so on and so forth, or is this the point where a more radical approach is needed for such changes to take place?
So I advocate for the Noam Chomsky approach, which is essentially voting is something you do every 2 to 4 years, depending on where you live in the United States, anyway. Um, but it should not be the one thing that you do.
Sure.
So like this is why I made my platform, right? I want to be able to talk with people. I want to be able to convince people that I'm right. I want to be able to make a case for these things so that we can build up a community of support, and not just so that we can like go into the streets and protest, but also so that like members of the community can go and run for local office, so they
Right.
can go and get involved specifically in the Democratic Party. Like I think that one of the best ways for us to move forward is by taking control over the Democratic Party, and we know that
Mm.
this is largely possible because in the primaries, or in the elections that just happened, most of the progressives who ran either kept their seats or were elected into office over establishment options. People want politicians who are pledging to improve their lives. And I think that this is
Right.
an extremely easy sell to the American people because we have been, in this country, conditioned not to expect anything from our government. Like, the common saying is that the government is wildly inefficient. I don't believe that that's true. I find that the government operation, without the incentive of need for being profitable, that's one of the most powerful things that we have under capitalism. It counterbalances all of that. So I want to be able to build a community where we have people who have hope and who run in their local elections, who build up a platform, and it might very well take time, but I want to inspire people and I want to be able to get this movement going because, like, again, it wasn't like a young, charismatic establishment candidate who turned Medicare for all into a national talking point and came within striking distance of the White House. It was like a 60-something-year-old man who, like, dresses frumpily and, like, has a very brusque way of talking. And, like, this is why I think we can win. Like, we have the popular support, I think, and I think we have the policies that can appeal to people on both sides of the aisle. Like, I've found that there are a lot of conservatives in this country who agree with the vast majority of my positions on how to improve society. Whether
Mm.
it's decommodifying housing so that homeless people can be housed, whether it is taking the like deprivatizing electricity, whether it is decommodifying education to varying degrees, whether it is giving everyone mental and health and physical health care. Like, these are things that people desperately need in this country, because it's not just liberals or neoliberals or lefties who are workers in this country. There are also conservatives who are workers. And I believe that conservatives also deserve good things. So
Right.
like when I advocate, I try and very specifically make sure that people know that I'm not just advocating for a system that's going to prop up lefties as like, we're the best, we're the vanguard, blah 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 blah. Like, I want to prop up a system that is very clearly going to benefit people in very tangible ways, and to be able to address their immediate needs. Um,
Yeah, I mean that's the difference, right,
mhm.
between a leftist and a right winger. The leftist, the kind of the meanest thing the leftist can say or do is say, "Well, you're dumb, and I want a society where you are happier." And and the right winger just asks for to put us on concentration camps. It's kind of
I mean, that was essentially the conversation I just had with that ANCAP, right? In a nutshell. It's not coercing you if I'm just withholding water unless you enter the concentration camp.
it's frustrating. Sometimes I wish I was a tanky just so I could like fight fire with fire and say, no, okay, I will shoot. No, you won't shoot me. I'll shoot you. But but it's not really the boat I'm riding on.
Right.
But I mean, speaking of tanking, in regards to this idea of working within the confines of liberal democracy and giving us left wing spaces, how do we address the issue of stability, right?
Hmm.
Because like, are you for a completely different? We're just already on Star Trek territory here, right? I'm already talking about like wild future where everyone is starting to get a bit more okay with socialistic ideas. Like, do we like create? Do we like restrict which kinds of political parties and ideas can be run for, or do we let capitalists still run a platform under the democratic system? Because currently, there are various countries where private property is on the constitution, and you can't really run a party that allows for the abolishment of it. So, like, would we do the other way around?
I
Make it so make it so you can't run up on a platform of bringing back capitalism, because the the ideas of fascism rising is still, it would still be a concern,
mhm.
even under market socialist society. It can always happen, right?
Right.
So how do we handle the issues of stability of democracy?
Well, I don't think it's the tanky way. Let me say that first off. Like, I think the tankies are extremely short sighted, and uh, I've heard it said this way, and I for the most part I agree with it. Tankies are authoritarians that use the aesthetics of communism and socialism in order to justify their authoritarianism, and I don't agree with their approaches. Um, so my political philosophy is largely based around freedom. I think I'm a libertarian socialist at heart. So my basic precept, I guess, my basic way that I would want to encourage stability is by protecting the freedom for capitalists to run. Like, I happen to think that the arguments of socialism are way better than the arguments of capitalism. Like, guys, think back to the conversation I just had with the caller who left in the middle of the call because they were in a huff. Think back to that conversation. Would you rather live in a world where it is justifiable for someone to let you die because they own the only source of water around, unless you work as a chattel slave for them? Is that the kind of world that you want to live in? Or do you want to live in a world where your basic needs are met and you're able to work to improve the quality of your life? I know which world I would rather live in. And it's not the one where someone is able to let me die just by nature of owning something. Um, that's yeah. I would rather do that. I think the arguments of capitalism, when distilled down to the basics, are very flimsy at best, and like extremely awful at worst. Um, like,
Yeah,
so I'm pro free speech. Like, I'm not against Nazis expressing their points of view because Nazis have terrible arguments. Like, have you listened to Nazis talk? They're really bad at it. Um, now I so like I'm in favor of letting these people speak. Um, and I think that largely the appeal of fascism and the appeal of capitalism largely lie in the same place, which is the idea that you're special, that you are going to be a billionaire, you are going to be part of the chosen people, the chosen race, you know. And I think that a lot of those ideas get wiped aside you are instead when you're instead appealing to the basic needs of people. What's the appeal of Nazism if people are all being fed and people all have health care and people all have places to live regardless of how much money they make? Like what's the appeal of capitalism in this society where everyone is able to make a really good living and is well connected in their communities? Like I don't think the appeal of it lasts under an actual socialist society.
I mean, I I will admit I am conflicted on the thought itself. I understand the argument you're making. There's even like a phrase of self that truth is a defense of itself.
Hmm.
Therefore, truth. Therefore, the opinions of the public, the opinions of people, and the general trends we work towards are those of truth, because it's the default place to be. And since socialism is right, socialism will happen. And I understand these arguments, but at the same time, like this is a very let's say it, it really is looking from the outside in from a very 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 large scale of trends,
Hmm.
and yet it can be argued that certain things have happened in the past, are happening now, and could have been prevented simply by the use of force. Let's
Hmm.
say Trump or Bolsonaro, they both were, and ever even before they ran, they were clearly antithetical to the very idea of democracy. So is it democratic to let an anti-democracy candidate run in that sense? Because you say you should allow Nazis to speak, but should we allow the Nazi party to come back in America, or should allow the Republican Party to keep existing while it trends towards it becoming an openly fascist party? Like where do we draw the line of pure democracy, and this pure democracy really something that allows for anti-democrats to run on? Because I would argue also that from some points of view, where capitalism by itself is damaging to democracy, and I can see
Hmm.
lots of others arguing that way.
Oh, I agree.
So how do we handle that structurally? Is it worth it to let Trumps and Bolsonaros and Erdogans and all these other people appear on the world only to maintain the philosophical stance of being true and trusting the public to follow truth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, democracy is good. That's my underlying assumption, right? And I think
Sure.
that by having a better platform that appeals to more people, that improves more people's lives, is something that will triumph over something that is more sectarian, like a or maybe that's not the right word, but like something that is more divisive, like a white supremacist ideology or something along those lines. But I also hear what you're saying, and I think that I don't want it to come across like I'm having like this hippy dippy like the truth will prevail, but like there is an undeniable element here that like people don't turn to fascism when their lives are going well. You know, someone doesn't become a Nazi when like their life is okay, you know? Um and so I would seek to remedy these problems largely by improving the actual conditions of their lives. Um and this is, I think, the only path forward unless we are willing to go full authoritarian, right? Like, unless we are willing to say, like, hey, sure, let's have an armed revolution against the state, which I don't advocate for. This is a hypothetical. Um, but, like, unless we're willing to say that, and I am only willing to even approach saying that if there is a feasible possibility of winning, which I'm not remotely convinced of at this time. Um, and on top of that, you need to be willing to say, fuck the underlying principles of our movement. You know, no free speech, no democracy, none of that. We're stamping you out. So like I'm I would say that anyone who is in that camp should be extremely hesitant, or leaning towards that camp should be extremely hesitant of adopting that outlook. I do agree that capitalism is inherently predatory and inherently destructive to democracy. But I guess in the hypothetical I thought we were talking about, like, you know, socialism has won. We have transitioned over to a socialist society. In that case, I truly do not think if we were in an actual socialist society with like fully decommodified stuff, with like a complete or near complete market socialist economy, I don't think that the pull of Nazism or the pull of capitalism would be that strong at all. I think a lot of people right now, in like the UK or other places in Europe, they tend to get convinced that privatizing things will improve the services, and that's just not backed up by like the empirical evidence. And I think that if we can provide these services and goods in a efficient and good way, um, I think that our ideas are way better. I think the ideas of the our opposition in this regard, the fascist opposition, have far less power in that sort of a society.
Okay. I mean,
If we're talking about like
I
a transitionary
yeah, yeah, yeah,
period,
yeah, yeah. I can see that argument for once capitalism is done with, right?
mhm,
Because yeah, it makes sense that once capitalism is completely castrated, it will probably not have the influence it has today, right? The capitalists won't be there to have their vote be more valuable than the vote of the average worker and whatnot and whatnot.
right.
But yeah, on the transitionary period, like we won, we did the revolution, or rather we had the Communist Party won, and um and we are on the process. We may have the opportunity to rewrite the constitution, whatnot,
Mhm.
like kind of like what China, in some regards, went through. Like how do we how is that are we just going to go back to the same model of democracy that was in bourgeoisie democracy, or are we going to be more or less restrictive, or are we going to be more direct democratic? Like, is representative democracy as it is on the US really the system that we should be striving for? Granted, we win and gain enough power to be able to change it, like, but at which point do we consider changing it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I am open to changing our political system if we have something that is objectively better. Like, I'm open to transitioning to socialism because I believe it's objectively better than capitalism. And I'm also open that when we achieve market socialism, that there might be something better than that. I advocate for market socialism as a first step.
Right.
So,
Right.
as far as like it being, you know, it's immediately after the success of taking control over the state. You have state power. Um, I I mean, like this is a problem that every government faces, right? Once you get
Right.
power, how are you going to hold it? Now,
Yeah.
I would rather avoid the pitfalls that we've seen in the USSR and China, where their method of holding on to it was highly centralizing their authority and becoming authoritarian state capitalist nations. Like I don't want to. I don't want that to happen. I want workers to have democracy in their workplace. I want workers to have democracy in their government. I think that that is a much better antidote to tyranny than becoming authoritarian. Um, Now, if someone can present me with like a better argument or like a way to organize a political system better than democracy, I'm definitely willing to hear it. But I also think that being in control of the state would would put us in a position to do a number of things to essentially heal democracy. Get money out of politics for starters. You know, get and again, this is assuming like we win control over the state, right? Get money out of politics. Get be able to I guess government funding for elections I think would be good, on top of like small dollar donations from individual citizens. um, I think that these are things that could fundamentally help fix our system. I'm sure there are other ways that I'm not like thinking about it right now, like other elements of how we could fix this. But
Hey! I'm very sorry. I kind of crashed
oh
because South American internet, but I'm back now.
oh, it's all
You were
good.
you were spe-
Yeah,
yeah, you were speaking about not central, not going the path of the USSR and China. Last I
yeah.
heard anything.
So just to recap really quick, not going the path of the USSR or China and becoming like a highly centralized authoritarian state that operates within like state capitalism, where the workers are also denied democracy. I don't think that's a good solution. But I'm open to other possibilities that we might not have thought yet. If someone can present to me like capitalism two, or not capitalism two, democracy two, a better version of democracy that it is more free than basic democracy. Um, but I also think that if we do gain state power, that this is the fundamental problem that all governments face. How do you maintain state power? Um, and I would advocate for us to maintain state power through continuing to win our elections, continuing to be good advocates, continuing to do these things. Um, and I would also say that with the power of the state, once we get into office, we win the presidency or whatever, we find a way to undo the incredible and myriad ways that capitalism has so far damaged our democracy. And once we fix those things, whether it is through limiting or eliminating the ability of companies to lobby, getting rid of private money in like public politics, um, or other things. I'm blanking on them right now, but healing our democracy so it's not as corrupted, or getting rid of the corruption of capitalism, I think should be a number one priority if we do get into office, because I think by healing those things, we can we have a much better shot at winning. Like
Right.
there there are far more, like right now there are far more lefties in the United States. There are far more liberals and neoliberals and lefties than there are conservatives. Like just statistically, there are far more of us. The main issue is getting people motivated out to vote. And I think socialist policies can get people motivated and out to vote. So I mean, even if you just look at America with our aged, decrepit system, right? We passed the Affordable Care Act, and the Affordable Care Act is like objectively a horrible piece of legislation, but it has a number of good elements. And even though it was widely despised by conservatives, they still couldn't get rid of it with a supermajority. So, like, once we pass these reforms, once we pass these things and they become institutionalized in society, they're extremely hard to get rid of, and they become extremely popular because they help a lot of people. So, um, again, like,
Right.
yeah,
Right. And to your point, and no, and yes, I am like this is just like a far off thing.
hmm
I'm sure conversations will be had in the far future about such things. And to your point, if your ideas are good and you help the conditions of the people, generally you keep winning. Right. This is what
hmm
happened in Bolivia.
right,
Evo Morales, he went through a very uphill battle against very liberalized systems, against a very bourgeoisie the way the campaign funds were managed was very bourgeoisie. The whole system was against him, and he went there with good ideas, and he got elected once, then twice, then he got exerted out of power. Then people protested, and then his successor won by a larger margin than he did.
hmm
So yeah, good ideas can work even on bourgeoisie democracy, and I do reject the often espoused but not always by Marxist Leninists that elections never matter. I do reject the idea to think that bourgeoisie democracy can be a path to power for left wingers and socialists. Um, with that said, how do you handle how do you handle the claims from the more totalitarian aspects of the left that say that, well, you ask for market socialism, yet China is a market socialist country, which is how they describe China. Why
hmm
isn't China a market socialist country?
I would,
If
oh,
if you had to talk to if you had to explain that
yeah.
to someone who holds such to espouse such claims.
Well, I typically define socialism in extremely simple terms so that it's very easy for people to understand. So, socialism has two aspects: workers controlling the means of production, and a decommodification of a significant portion of the economy. So, I would ask, do workers in China have control over the means of production? I would say that, given that they need to build suicide nets outside of their factories, the answer is no. I don't think that they have that. So I just kind of the idea that they're a market socialist society is silly to me.
But 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 and I'm trying to kind of just
hmm
play at those advocate. But they all the companies are forced into being part of the state union. So they are under union control. And also all of that is China is doing is bringing forth the productive forces so that they can become the number one power on earth. And socialism can happen by 2050, which is the plan, right?
I
How
mean,
how do
supposedly
how
the
do we
plan.
yeah how do we handle this idea that China is the only reason China has to liberalize its economy is so it grows and becomes the number one, and socialism before we die. How I mean I
I
mean
mean,
what's the common counter to that argument?
I would say having a one party system in which the party gets to decide who runs is not a democratic process. It's not a valid, free election. And as such, like, the workers don't have meaningful control over their working conditions. Ergo, they do not control the means of production. The party, the government party, controls the means of production. And I think that that is a very big distinction. Um, same with the USSR. That a lot of most of the people working in the USSR didn't have control over their working conditions. They didn't control the means of production. The state came in and told them what to do and where to do it, and I find that to be an odious concept. I reject it. Now, as to like the longer term goals of China, I would say that if you are someone who is anti-capitalist, you probably shouldn't be rooting for the country that is most effectively doing capitalism. I don't think that that's a good strategy, and I find it laughable that socialists or lefties embrace it.
But Jack, they
Yeah,
promised a socialism. How could you doubt their word?
I mean, at the very least, I think that their way of doing imperialism is better than how Europeans did it. But like, I don't. No, we this is why you need democratic processes in order
No,
to keep these governments in line, and in order for the working people to advocate for their own positions and their own betterment.
I see. So this is not a Dengue's channel. Oh my God, what am I doing here? And and to be clear, I mean, am I like overstaying my welcome here because I'm having a lot of fun talking
Oh, it's
and
fine.
if you want other colors to come in, you can tell anytime, right?
Yeah.
Um, and
Oh,
I'm honestly constantly baffled by the left. I had so many talks with people, and honestly, before I really got into left wing politics, I was really surprised that there were tons of people who were like unironically Juche
unironically,
and
what?
Juche like pro DPRK, pro
Oh,
North
gotcha.
Korea, and it's just and I can't engage with these people anymore. I don't know how to do, like how to do it, how to talk to a tanky. How do we do it?
Well,
Like because we can't let them overtake the movement.
I think that largely, and this is gonna maybe sound bad or dismissive. I don't think that they are a large enough contingent of the left to overtake control over a significant socialist movement. Like the actual number of tankies, I believe, is extremely low. Um,
I see.
and I think that a lot of their arguments fall apart when you're just like, yeah, but I'm not pro authoritarianism. Like I sorry, I don't like authoritarian dictatorships. I'm opposed to that. And I think that it's a really hard sell, especially in America, to get people on board with like, yeah, authoritarianism until we establish the perfect socialist utopia. I no, I think that that's a really hard sell for most people. Um,
just from an optics standpoint, right? Even if they were right, these
mhm.
ideas would not spread. Yeah, it's kind of like
From an
it's
optics standpoint, just we got to disavow them. You know, like
yeah.
I'm for anyone out there who's watching, I'm not pro authoritarian in the slightest. Also, death by roar. I also aim have higher aspirations than market socialism. I just think market socialism is a good, sensible first step that you can make some really good arguments for. Um,
And one question about market socialism
yeah,
also, like how does market socialism prevent imperialism? Like
right.
because there's still the profit motive.
Hmm.
Markets obviously still exist. You can use you can leverage your power over other nations and peoples and groups. So how does that uh, happen? How do we handle that, right?
Yeah.
How
So I think this will have to be the your final meme. Because there are other people who want to hop in the call, but
okay, it's
it's
fine.
lovely talking with you. You're welcome to come back anytime.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But
Thank you.
to answer your question, like I'm not going to pretend that like market socialism is going to completely stop imperialism. I think that there are definitely some circumstances that would incentivize like a worker co-op to engage in imperialism or to try and get the state to engage in imperialism for their profit. However, I think that having a democratically run workplace works against these companies having a motive to do so. So, like, for example, if your company is democratically owned and operated, right? And you have to have a pitch meeting to your workers to be like, hey, so we would make more money if we like dumped a bunch of sewage into this reservoir is near our property. We're legally able to do this for some reason, um, and that means people will have to buy our factory bottled water, right? I think that that's going to be a really hard sell to people. And similarly, I think it's going to be a really hard sell if even if it's a large worker co-op that does business in other countries, right? Um, and so I would say that maybe my hope, my long-term hope for like a market socialist society would be that because market socialist societies are able to better integrate with like global capitalism, we would be able to almost export using like the hegemony of the United States to a certain degree. We would be able to export worker co-ops as a good business model to other countries that we do business with. And by doing that, we might be able to lessen or eliminate the impacts of imperialism, or get rid of imperialism entirely.
Okay, that's reasonable. And okay, I'm going now for the other callers to come in, and I just
Yeah.
want to say, like, you've been streaming for like 1 month, right?
Yeah, about a month and a half.
Yeah, you're doing great work. I hope you
Oh,
keep growing.
thank you.
You're really a big help, right? Just keep increasing your voice, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Also, where can people find you if they want some of your content?
I mean, I don't have a channel myself, but I do often appear as a guest on Ambiguobot's channel.
On whose
And
channel?
he's a Ambiguobot. I'm going to just
Yeah, send me a link over in on the Discord and I can post
sure,
it in chat.
sure. So he's a great fellow. He's also a socialist. And
Awesome.
we often have discussions on matters of socialism as well. So if anyone wants to check more good socialist content, I recommend him. Right, it's not my channel, but I do appear there often.
Okay.
And thank you a lot again. Okay,
Yeah.
I hope we can talk more in the future. Okay,
Yeah. Of course. You're welcome back anytime.
thank you. Bye bye.
Bye. There you go. Check out Ambiguobot. Um, apparently a very based content creator. That was a fun conversation.